What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL playoffs, conference championships. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for this week's NFL slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay, guys, NFL playoffs, conference championships. Let's take a look at this two-game Sunday slate. So at the quarterback position, I think the stud on the slate because of the injury to Patrick Mahomes is Jalen Hurts from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the San Francisco 49ers, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing quarterbacks, but Jalen Hurts has averaged 26.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 31% owned, projected at 27.9 fantasy points here tonight. He is 7,200 DraftKings salary, 2,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45.5 points scored in this game, with the Eagles favored by 2.5. Now, Jalen Hurts has scored 24 and 10 fantasy points in his last two games. He got 9 rush attempts in each of those games. So I like Jalen Hurts, especially because of his rushing upside here versus the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the other quarterback that I like, and he's got the best quarterback matchup on the slate by a huge margin here, is Joe Burrow from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have the 9th worst defense overall, give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Joe Burrow has averaged 23.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.7 rush attempts per game, who have the 9th worst defense overall and give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Joe Burrow has averaged 23.8 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 4.7 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 29% owned. Oh, did I say Jalen Hurts is going to be about 31% owned? I think I forgot that stat. So Joe Burrow about 29% owned, projected at 23 fantasy points here on Sunday. And he's 6,800 DraftKings salary, 1,500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game. They have the Bengals trailing by 1.5. Now, Joe Burrow has scored 21, 21, and 13 fantasy points in his last 3 games. He got 6, 5, and 3 rush attempts in those games. So I like Joe Burrow here on Sunday because he has the best quarterback matchup, not even close. And then the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, they should continue to put the pressure on Joe Burrow to score the ball. He's got some pretty good weapons at the wide receiver position, some pretty good pass catchers. So I like Joe Burrow here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I'll probably stay away from Patrick Mahomes in a bad matchup with a questionable ankle. We're not sure if he's going to be hindered by that injury or not, so I'm not going to take the risk. Plus, it's just not a good matchup either way, and he is the most expensive quarterback on the slate. You want to save some salary, you could take a look. You take a look or take a chance with Brock Purdy, sitting at only 5,300 DraftKings salary, 1,600 more on FanDuel. Now, Brock Purdy scored 9, 38, and 20 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He got 3, 4, and 4 rush attempts in those games. So Brock Purdy going to be about 16% owned. Probably going to stay away from him. I might play one Brock Purdy lineup just because you're going to get a huge salary savings from Brock Purdy. So if he does happen to put up that 30-plus fantasy point game, you're going to be in a good spot in your lineup. So Patrick Mahomes about 26% owned. So it looks like the top 2 most popular quarterbacks going to be Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So, stud on the slate, and a guy I'm going to have quite a bit, is Christian McCaffrey from the San Francisco 49ers playing the Philadelphia Eagles, who have a good defense overall, middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Christian McCaffrey has averaged 21.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 14.4 rush attempts per game and 6.4 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 52% owned, projected at 22.7 fantasy points here on Sunday. He's 8,000 DraftKings salary, 1,000 more on FanDuel. Christian McCaffrey has scored 18, 25, and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He got 10, 15, and 10 rush attempts in those games off of 8, 2, and 3 pass targets. So I like Christian McCaffrey here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, if you want to save some salary, coming down from Christian McCaffrey, the next most expensive running back is Joe Mixon from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have the 9th worst defense overall, middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Joe Mixon has averaged 17.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 15 rush attempts per game, 5.4 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 49% owned, projected at 21.2 fantasy points here on Sunday. So that projection is almost as high as Christian McCaffrey. And Joe Mixon is only 6,500 DraftKings salary, 1,600 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game. They have the Bengals trailing by 1.5. So Joe Mixon has scored 23, 9, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He got 20, 11, and 11 rush attempts on top of 3, 4, and 5 pass targets. So when you're looking at like a value perspective out of like the salary of the player to their projected points, I think Joe Mixon, probably the highest value play on the slate because he's sitting at only 6,500 DraftKings salary, projected at 21.2 points. That's 6.5 times value. Great matchup. Probably going to be in just about every one of my lineups. I think it's going to be hard to get away from Joe Mixon. I think his ownership is going to be more than 49%. So I like Joe Mixon here versus the Kansas City Chiefs.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, now for the Kansas City Chiefs, because of the injury to Patrick Mahomes, I think you're going to get some more action for these KC running backs. Take a look at Isaiah Pacheco from the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing running backs. Isaiah Pacheco has scored 11, 12, and 13 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 12, 8, and 9 rush attempts, on top of 1, 0, and 2 pass targets. So Isaiah Pacheco going to be about 20% owned, projected at 10 fantasy points here on Sunday. I think he can score at least 15 fantasy points in this one, because I do think he's going to get some extra volume here in this game while they try to protect Patrick Mahomes. So Isaiah Pacheco is 5,300 DraftKings salary, 1,000 more on FanDuel, and we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game. Isaiah Pacheco, he's an explosive running back. He's just not getting a lot of touches, but I do expect his touches to go up this game. So I think that's going to increase his fantasy point production. So I like Isaiah Pacheco here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, another low salary running back, if you want to consider Miles Sanders from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the San Francisco 49ers. It's going to be tough to play Miles Sanders because the 49ers have the best defense overall, and they give up the absolute fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. And Miles Sanders hasn't exactly done much in the past 3 games. Only scored 9, 3, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 17, 11, and 12 rush attempts. Only got 1 pass target out of those last 3 games as well, so doesn't get many pass targets out of the backfield. So you're looking at the rush attempts, touchdown dependent, against one of the best, or the best defense defending the run. I think it's going to be a tall order here for Miles Sanders, but he is going to be about 30% owned, projected at 14 fantasy points here on Sunday. He's $5,200 DraftKings salary, 1,000 more on FanDuel. So I think, it's a coin flip between Isaiah Pacheco and Miles Sanders, but I like Miles Sanders as an option here versus the San Francisco 49ers. Now, some other options you can look at here, the ownership of Jeric McKinnon has gone up quite a bit. Jeric McKinnon from the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who have a good defense overall, been good versus opposing running backs. Jeric McKinnon, he's averaged 11.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.2 rush attempts per game and 4.2 pass targets per game. So Jeric McKinnon is more of the back that will catch the ball out of the backfield, and he could get a lot of work here tonight with Patrick Mahomes hindered a little bit with that ankle, dumping the ball off to his running back. So because of that, Jeric McKinnon going to be about 40% owned here, projected at 15.6 fantasy points. He's $5,400 DraftKings salary, 1,100 more on FanDuel. Now, Jeric McKinnon has scored 3, 9, and 23 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 11, 2, and 2 rush attempts, on top of 0, 3, and 6 pass targets. So, the usage between Jeric McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco has been game script independent. And if I were to call a game script here tonight, I think it would favor Jeric McKinnon, as I don't think that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to have a big lead in this game, and I do think they're going to dump the ball off to their running back, Jeric McKinnon, quite a bit. So especially on DraftKings with that fantasy point per reception, I like Jeric McKinnon here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So the stud on the slate is Jamar Chase from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have the 9th worst defense overall, give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Jamar Chase has averaged 21.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11.2 pass targets per game, and he's going to be about 48% owned, projected at 24.9 fantasy points here on Sunday. He's $7,600 DraftKings salary, 1,000 more on FanDuel. Jamar Chase has scored 17, 23, and 23 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 8, 12, and 13 pass targets. Got a great matchup here tonight in what should be a high-scoring game and a close competitive game. So I like Jamar Chase here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Another wide receiver I like is A.J. Brown from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the San Francisco 49ers, who do have a good defense overall, but they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. A.J. Brown has averaged 18.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.6 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 36% owned, projected at 20.6 fantasy points here on Sunday. He's $7,000 DraftKings salary, 1,000 more on FanDuel. Now, A.J. Brown has scored 5, 14, and 20 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 6, 10, and 9 pass targets. So I like A.J. Brown here versus the San Francisco 49ers. Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Now, I also like Devonta Smith from the Eagles. I think these guys, you could just flip a coin and go with either A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith. They're both about the same salary, averaging about the same fantasy points with about the same pass targets per game and about the same ownership as well. Devonta Smith going to be about 38% owned, where A.J. Brown about 36% owned. So go ahead and pick one of those guys. Now let's go ahead and move on here. You're looking for a low salary wide receiver. Plenty of options here. You got T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals at only 5,400 DraftKings salary, averaging 14.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.8 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 34% owned. Then you have Brandon Aiyuk from the San Francisco 49ers at only 4,400 DraftKings salary. He's averaging 13.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.7 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 30% owned. Out of those two guys, if you have the extra 1,000, I definitely prefer T. Higgins, who's got a much better matchup. But if you want to save even more salary here, you got an option with Tyler Boyd from the Cincinnati Bengals in a good matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs, averaging 10.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.1 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 20% owned, and he's projected at 10.5 fantasy points. Now, he's only 3,800 DraftKings salary. Now, Tyler Boyd has only scored 3, 6, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 2, 3, and 7 pass targets. But I think he could be the sleeper pick here this weekend. He's got 2 touchdown upside in a good matchup, super low salary, and pretty low ownership for a 2-game slate. So I like Tyler Boyd as my sleeper pick here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now you also have Deebo Samuel for the San Francisco 49ers, sitting at 5,700 DraftKings salary, going to be about 38% owned. What I like about this pick is that Deebo Samuel, averaging 13.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.2 pass targets per game. But what I like about Deebo Samuel is he's also averaging 3.2 rush attempts per game, got 7 rush attempts in the last 2 games, scored 10 and 32 fantasy points in those games off of 7 and 9 pass targets. So when you get the rush attempts and the pass targets, it gives them some pretty good fantasy point upside at only 5,700 DraftKings salary, projected at 13.7 fantasy points here today. But we know he's got some monster 20-plus fantasy point upside, so I like Deebo Samuel as a value play here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. Now, despite being questionable, he was a full participant in practice, so I like Travis Kelce from the Kansas City Chiefs. The Bengals, good defense overall, middle of the pack defending opposing tight ends. Travis Kelce has averaged 19.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.9 pass targets per game. Gonna be about 53% owned, projected at 23.8 fantasy points here tonight. He's 7,800 DraftKings salary. Travis Kelce has scored 36, 10, and 11 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 17, 7, and 10 pass targets. Now, be a little bit cautious here with Travis Kelce because you do have Patrick Mahomes with a bum ankle out there. He might not throw the ball as much as he's used to. So Travis Kelce I don't think we're going to see 17 pass targets here today. I think we might see it more around his season average of 9 pass targets. Now, he absolutely could go off in 9 pass targets, but you're paying $7,800, one of the most expensive players on the slate. I just think there's a little bit too much risk there. But, of course, he does have the most upside and the highest ceiling, probably out of any skill position on the slate. So I like Travis Kelce here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, so there's 3 other tight ends that I like, and I'm just going to go through these 3 guys real quick. So you got George Kittle at $5,200 DraftKings salary from the 49ers. Brock Purdy likes George Kittle, throwing the ball to him quite a bit since he took over, and George Kittle has scored 15, 8, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 5, 2, and 6 pass targets. Going to be about 24% owned, projected at 15.7 fantasy points. So George Kittle sitting at $5,200 DraftKings salary. Now coming down in salary, you have Dallas Goedert from the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the 49ers have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing tight ends. But Dallas Goedert has averaged 12.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.8 pass targets per game. Gonna be about 42% owned. So it looks like a lot of people want that $1,100 savings coming down from George Kittle. I think it makes a lot of sense. Dallas Goedert scored 17, 11, and 8 fantasy points in the last 3 games, up of 5, 7, and 6 pass targets. So it looks like you're getting more pass targets to Dallas Goedert at a lower price tag. Now, George Kittle probably has more of a ceiling, but I think Dallas Goedert, sitting at $4,100 DraftKings salary, will get more pass targets in this game. And he's been on the field for 90% of the snaps. So I like Dallas Goedert here versus the San Francisco 49ers. Now, if you want a sleeper pick or a value play here at the tight end position, take a look at Hayden Hurst from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have the 9th worst defense overall, give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Hayden Hurst has averaged 8.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.2 pass targets per game. Going to be about 28% owned, projected at 8.9 fantasy points here on Sunday. He's only $3,000 DraftKings salary, $2,400 more on FanDuel. So I love that DraftKings price. Hayden Hurst has scored 17, 8, and 5 fantasy points in the last 3 games of a 6, 6, and 5 pass targets. So he's got the best tight end matchup on the slate, the lowest salary, and the guy scored 17 fantasy points last week off of 6 pass targets. So I like Hayden Hurst here versus the Kansas City Chiefs.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite
Player for this NFL slate.
I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.